Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Adrenal Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. Hi, everyone. I am Amanda Panacea, and this is my very first solo episode. I have been really contemplating what I was going to do a solo episode on because I feel like there's so many puzzle pieces of my story that I could narrow in on and talk about. But after doing a lot of thinking and deciding to call my group program the Adrenal Revolution, I wanted to focus on the burnout, the adrenal issues, and what it is that really drives you to continue to burn yourself to the ground. Because this is a pattern I have been experiencing for my entire life. And I know a lot of high achieving, really powerful women suffer is a good word, from these patterns. So I really wanted to dive into these kind of topics. So I will just start from the beginning. I am the firstborn of 3 children. So I have a younger brother and a younger sister. I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. I did dance. I met my best friend when I was 2 years old, and she is still my best friend to this day. And then as I got older, I decided I wanted to do swimming instead because I always really loved swimming. And I was a competitive swimmer from the age of 11 until all the way through college. So growing up, I really loved school. I thought it was very fun. I loved learning. I was very competitive. I have a little bit of Aries in my chart. I'm an Aries rising, as well as Virgo sun, Virgo moon. So I have a lot of high achieving, competitive type things in my chart. And also as a firstborn, I also took on a lot of caretaker roles. I took a lot of responsibility, I felt a lot of responsibility for taking care of my brother and sister and teaching them. One of the sweetest, nicest things my brother ever said to me was, "You could always explain things to me in a way that I understood when other adults and other people couldn't do that." So my heart broke a little bit and I teared up when he told me that, because I felt that kind of responsibility as a really young child, which is very common for oldest children. Through competitive swimming is when I really excelled at discipline. If you know anything about competitive swimming, they practice and train multiple times a day, and you only get 1 day off on Sundays. So sometimes I would get up and go to swim practice at 4:30 in the morning. Before high school, we practiced every single night. After high school, I didn't even go home in between Saturday mornings. We had an extra long swim practice. And then in the summer, we had double swim practice 5 days a week, and then swim practice Saturday morning. So I was literally working out constantly around the same group of people, my swim team, for at least 10 years of my life. Maybe not 10 years, maybe 8 years, plus then the 2 years I swam at college. But it takes an incredible amount of being able to shove how you're feeling down to perform at that level. And this is really where I believe that I learned, I could not feel bad. It didn't matter if I felt bad, to suck it up, to keep going. Doesn't matter if it's the worst day of your life, you still have to go to swim practice. And there was also a financial responsibility that we had as well. So we got something called travel assistance if we made, I think it was like 96% attendance, which basically was every day of the season. You could miss maybe one or two. And so you really couldn't get sick. If you missed that many days, you would automatically not be qualified for the travel assistance, which meant that you couldn't go to the swim meet, and which meant you may even be kicked off the team depending on which swim meet it was. And of course, swim meets to me were the funnest thing that you could ever do. You're swimming for like 5 minutes out of the 8 hours of the day. And the rest of the time you're hanging out with your friends, you're, messing around with boys. So of course I didn't want to ever miss swim meets. And so and when competitive sports, I think a lot of people can relate that did competitive sports, especially that had really like drill sergeant-y swim coaches or coaches in general, that you really couldn't have a bad day. Like you just had to get over it. You had to suck it up, or, they taught you that you weren't going to be able to keep excelling because winners are able to do this. So then I moved and went to college in Florida. I did swimming for about 2 years until I was just so incredibly burnt out. The swim team I was in high school was very, very intense and lots of endurance. And then I went to a sprinting college where everyone just goofed around and barely practiced. And I was getting worse and worse in college. And then I finally decided to quit. College was amazing for me. I went on to get my first master's in counseling because I really, really wanted to work with addicts. I have a lot of addiction and alcoholism in my family, and just regular alcohol use was very common growing up for me. And I almost didn't even know that other people didn't drink like that until I was much older. I just assumed that this is how all families were. And all the people around me, uncles, aunts, cousins, people on my street, alcohol was just the fabric of what brought everyone together for parties or get-togethers. There was almost no one I knew that didn't drink pretty heavily. And then as I grew up, I really wanted to understand not only what was quote unquote wrong with me, because I always felt like I didn't really fit in. I didn't like where I grew up. I felt like I was missing out on a lot of things in the world. And I always felt very isolated. I did always have some very close friends, like I said, which started, my best friend when I was 2, but I didn't really feel like we fit in to the culture that we were around. And ironically, both of us moved right out of college, right out of high school. And so right after college is when 2008 economy collapsed. And I was like, well, I guess I'm getting a master's degree since I can't get a job. So I went back to school for counseling. Ironically, this is when my substance abuse was at its worst. I started drinking, I don't know, maybe at like 13. But because I was a competitive swimmer, it was very rare. However, when I quit swimming, finally, I was able to have a social life. And I was like, finally. And of course, that's when a lot of partying started, party drugs like ecstasy, cocaine. Ecstasy was my favorite absolute drug that I've ever done. It really transformed my self-esteem. I felt self-love for the first time in my entire life. I always did not like myself. I always thought I was ugly and fat. I always thought people wouldn't remember me. And I just had really low self-esteem for up until that point. I realized how amazing I was and how much control I actually had over my life. I left an abusive relationship, but then of course got right back into another relationship that was really like most of our relationship was partying, drug and alcohol use. So that wasn't necessarily better. But the next couple of years, even through getting out of grad school, substance abuse was a very huge part of my life. It was pretty much work all day, party all night, barely sleep. And I was burning the candle on both ends for many, many years until finally it caught up to me. In 2015, I realized that I was not doing so well. My histamine issues were getting worse. I was gaining weight a lot easier. I was very, very tired for the first time in my life. I was always kind of like an Energizer bunny. And I was just really exhausted, But the thing that really got me was that all of my hair fell out. And that's when I found a functional medicine practitioner. I had also started listening to Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio around actually before that. And I was trying to implement some of his practices, but still going out and partying. So there was like a big disconnect there. So finally, the functional medicine doctor that I found, she said, you have severe adrenal fatigue. She also told me that I was dealing with the most severe calcium shell she had ever seen in her many years of practice. Calcium shell, I talk about on my Instagram a lot. It is when your body is just dumping calcium out of your bones and teeth where it needs to be. Calcium is very hard and sturdy. And as a trauma response, it's pulling that calcium out, and it's free flowing throughout your body. So it can be in your blood, or it can be calcifying glands or arteries. It can also harden cell walls, which is pretty bad because then the hormones you need can't bind to the receptors because it's blocked because of the hard calcium. And so on an HTMA test, which is hair tissue mineral analysis, my calcium is basically like sky high, which they call a calcium shell or a calcium wall, because as a protective measure, when you go through a lot of trauma or high stress, your body is trying to harden you so that you don't get hurt again. It's fascinating. The body always has it never makes a mistake. And so calcium is just getting dumped out to harden you so that you don't feel the difficulty, the shame, the guilt, the sadness. And so when she told me that, I started to make some changes. I stopped doing high intensity interval training. I was even working out with like an MMA coach at the time, which I was horrible at, but you can see like everything that I did was always very high intensity, very little rest. I never allowed myself to rest. In fact, the only time I really did was when we would have what we called couch days, which was when we were so hungover we couldn't even do anything. And of course, during a couch day, it was where your body is just so shut down that you have to rest. But also, there was still a lot of guilt and shame that I felt on those days. So it wasn't a true rest. Like it was not an aligned, I deserve this rest. It was more so, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it again. And so I stopped with working out high intensity. I tried to sleep more. I tried to stop partying. I started doing yoga, which absolutely transformed my relationship with my body and my nervous system. The first couple of times I did yoga, of course, I wasn't very good at it. But then as I started to get the hang of it, I started to get in that flow state and connecting with my breath and releasing things that I had been just stuffing way down inside. I never had a mentor. I never really felt like there was someone I could go to if I was really, really hurt. My parents were very supportive and they loved me. You know, my parents they're still together and we have a really amazing family unit, but I still felt like there wasn't a space for me to safely open up and explain my feelings without maybe someone being in a bad mood and yelling at me, or maybe like causing somebody else to be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong, and shut down and take it as if it was their fault that I was feeling bad. And so I learned to kind of not have emotions and shut them down for many, many years. And so when I started doing yoga, of course, it was the first time I had intentionally slowed down and done something that was very somatic and incorporated things like sensations and breath and being grounded. And I started studying this a lot more because it made me feel so much better than high intensity interval training. Of course, when the doctor told me that I had adrenal fatigue, and I'm using quotes, which we'll get to as to why, I immediately thought, if I stop exercising like this, I'm going to blow up. I'm going to get so huge. And just to backtrack a little, the way I used to think in my early 20s was that if I could just keep my heart rate up and move as much as I possibly could throughout the day, that it would help me to stay thinner. I was always dealing with extra weight, even when I was a competitive swimmer. Looking back, I was not overweight in any way, shape, or form, but I just had that very low self-esteem where I thought I was huge, like body dysmorphic disorder and some disordered eating patterns. When I was in my early 20s and I used to try and just not sleep, keep my heart rate up, I would like move in place. I did ephedra. So I had a lot of stimulant use in my past, and I'm sure just completely wrecked my metabolism. And so fast forward to being told I had adrenal fatigue, and I thought, like, I'm gonna get so fat if I have to rest all the time, if I can't move, if I can't exercise. And it turned out to be the opposite. So my body needed the rest so bad. It needed the yoga, it needed the meditation and sleeping. And I actually started to feel so much better, but it wasn't like 100%. So all of those little changes that I did, I started eating way better. I had been vegetarian for 11 years at that point, and that's when I started introducing grass-fed meats back into my diet. And I just overall felt a lot better. My hair started growing back, which was like the main reason that I was so upset, because I dyed my hair all sorts of colors, and it just really was a huge part of my identity. So I started working on slowing down. I learned how to do meditation and breath work. I was horrible at it, and I was horrible at it for a really long time. But yoga really, really was helpful. So then fast forward a bit. I'm still going out. I'm still partying. I finally get out of that relationship that was really surrounded with a lot of drugs and alcohol. But of course, then I'm single. I moved to Miami, which was something that I had dreamed of doing for years. And me being single in Miami, I actually almost immediately met the person I am with to this day. However, we weren't together in the beginning. So getting down to Miami, I kind of lost a little bit of that self-care that I had been doing throughout the next couple of years. Lots of ups and downs, but my alcohol use was definitely a coping mechanism for me not being able to speak my truth, not being able to use my emotions, not being able to tell someone how I really felt. I realized that this was a problem around this time. Like, wow, I really can't say what's on my mind unless I'm using alcohol. So I was incredibly shut down, and it was really hard for me to connect and use my words to explain how I felt. Like, I didn't even know how I felt. I couldn't really feel almost anything, which is one of the symptoms of a very high calcium shell. It's shutting you down so you can't feel. And I just felt completely gray and like lost. And I was using alcohol and still a little bit of drugs to feel connections with other people and to feel happiness and pleasure. It was very hard for me to feel emotions. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize it 100%, but hindsight is 2020. I realize it now. And then I was really just getting sick of using alcohol and still using drugs sometimes. And I asked the universe, the divine, I said, please give me a reason to quit this lifestyle. I was having a really hard time quitting it, not because I felt like I was addicted, but because I still thought it was really fun, because it was the only way that I felt like myself, because I could actually express myself. And it was the only way I felt like I truly connected with people. I felt very like awkward in non-sober interactions. And that's when it's a huge problem. So then the universe was like, okay, you think it's going to be a husband and a baby? No, we're going to give you a fucking reason to quit this lifestyle. And so they gave me hepatitis A. I was hospitalized. My liver enzyme hit almost 5,000. I was yellow. It was incredibly scary because they didn't know what was wrong with me at first. And then after that, it took about a year for my liver enzymes to fully come down, During that time, that's when I was exposed to mold in a beautiful building on the water, but it was a little older. So you could actually see mold in the AC units. And that was my current boyfriend's apartment.
Have you had to give up coffee for health reasons? Maybe because of the stress it was putting on your adrenals, maybe because it was messing with your sleep, maybe because you felt terrible after drinking it, or maybe because you were told coffee had mold on the beans and you needed to stay away from mold. Well, what if I told you there's an organic, mycotoxin-free, quality coffee that contains reishi spores or Ganoderma lucidum? Ganoderma lucidum helps to modulate your immune system, adapt to stress, balance hormones, and doesn't give you the jitters or shakes like regular coffee used to. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's called King Coffee by the company Organo. And King Coffee came into my life when I was struggling with chronic hives, full body eczema, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hadn't drank coffee in years because it made me feel anxious, shaky, and clammy. So I had no expectations that drinking King Coffee would be any different. However, I decided to give it a try after seeing lots of amazing practitioners talk about the benefits of reishi online. I tried a 7-day sample and the chronic hives were gone by day 5. I was in shock. After that, I dove into the research on reishi and found that there are over 3,000 peer-reviewed PubMed clinical trials using reishi Ganoderma as an intervention. The company Organo also has a patent protected on their harvesting process. They double crack open the spore shells, which makes them up to 80% more potent than the body of the reishi, which is usually used in other reishi products. This also makes the spores 90% more bioavailable for your body to use. If you would like to try King Coffee, visit thehealerrevolution.myorganogold.com, or for a 7-day trial, you can check out my link tree on my Instagram at Amanda Panacea.
During that first year, things were okay. I knew that his apartment made me itchy. And when I left, I thought, I'm not exposed anymore. The itching goes away. However, about a year and a half-ish later is when I started getting rashes everywhere. And I realized when I left the apartment, it wasn't going away anymore. Like it was chronic at that point. And then it escalated very fast from there. So ironically, I had gone back to school for functional medicine a couple years before. After me changing my lifestyle and diet helped me so much with the quote unquote adrenal fatigue that I really wanted to help people because I had been in the mental health industry, psychiatric hospitals, detox, higher level of care. And I just saw how barbaric it was. And I wanted to be a part of helping to make that change. So I went back to school for functional medicine. And by the time I was graduating was the time my health was absolutely in the gutter. That's when I had all the symptoms of mold illness, horrible candida overgrowth, the rashes, they were all over my face and neck and full body almost. They just continued to spread for about a year. And also horrible brain fog. I was forgetting words after dark when I got too tired. I couldn't even form full sentences. It was very scary and very hard to do my job. I had a lot of anxiety and panic, which is not like me. I have a very future oriented thought patterns, but I had never had the panic and anxiety and insomnia and all the issues that came with mold. And then around the end of that first year, I had gotten ups and downs, roller coaster, found bioresonance. And that's when I really started to see improvement, found King Coffee. And that's when the rashes went away, the hives went away. I've been diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome. And I was like, fuck that. I am not having that illness. That is not happening because I knew exactly what it was and how terrible it was. And so then things gotten better until I started doing parasite cleansing. And I was working with some really amazing, brilliant people. But what I know now is that if you're going to try to do parasite work and you have mast cell or really, really unstable histamine intolerance, and you already are dealing with itching and rashes, parasite cleansing is going to be incredibly difficult in the beginning because you have to stabilize the mast cell condition. And parasites will flare it because they elicit a Th2 response, which is that branch of the immune system that releases eosinophils to go after parasites. And those also are involved in mast cell. On lab work, you should not see your eosinophils, they're abbreviated EOS on labs. They should not be above a 3. Above a 3 is indicative of either it could be a red flag for parasites, or it could be a red flag for an allergic response or mast cell degranulation. So shouldn't be above a 3, right? Mine went all the way up to a 28, which is astronomically high. To this day, of all the people I've worked with, even people with mast cell, I've never seen it that high in anyone else. So yay me, I get to win. I found low dose immunotherapy and decided this was going to be my saving grace, and found the doctor who would do it. Very expensive. She recommended, and also all the research recommended, that I do a round of prednisone the first couple times that I did the low dose immunotherapy. It's kind of like homeopathy, but you do it every 7 weeks for at least a year. And you can do low dose immunotherapy for everything all at the same time. So that's why I really wanted to do it. So I did like a whole vial for Lyme and co-infections, yeast and mold, foods, chemicals, the herpes viruses. I sent in like skin. You can also send in like your own feces. Histamine I did too. So it's really a good tool if you're dealing with an immune system that is like just incredibly overactive and mast cell. And so I took the round of prednisone. It was 12 days. And during this, all the rashes went away, almost, not fully. And right afterwards, I started to develop the symptoms of topical steroid withdrawal, which is the most horrific hell I have ever had to experience in my entire life. I did not know you could be in so much pain and agony and uncomfortableness until I went through that. And this was really like the rashes were bad, the mast cell was horrible, the mold illness was scary, but nothing, absolutely nothing that I ever could imagine experiencing was topical steroid withdrawal. And I'm calling it topical steroid withdrawal because that is what it is called, even if it's from oral steroids. Because what happens is all of your skin starts to just melt off and flake off. It spreads and it covers your entire body. You are on fire, but you are freezing cold. You have no temperature control, no temperature regulation whatsoever. So here I am in Miami and I'm wearing a giant sweatshirt, but it's so painful for anything to be touching my skin that you almost want to be naked, but you're so freezing, like you need a heater next to you. This went on for a good 7 months of just getting worse in different phases. You can go to itsan.com, or I think .org, and you can watch a video on all the symptoms of topical steroid withdrawal. I honestly cannot believe that they have topical steroids over the counter still. Lots of doctors say it's not a real condition. Part of me also wonders if I placebo or manifested topical steroid withdrawal because I knew that it existed and I knew the symptoms. And then on top of that, I did not want to take the prednisone so badly that it was almost like subconsciously I told myself, you show them what's going to happen. You didn't want to do this and you did it anyways because everybody told you to. And then of course manifested into that. Now, of course, I'll never know that, but it just goes to show you that because I should not have had such a drastic reaction to such a short dose of oral prednisone. It's very rare, I would say. Most people take prednisone for a bit and they are totally fine. So don't get freaked out. It can save your life in certain situations. But in my situation, my nervous system was just wrecked from having mast cell for at least a year. And also my nervous system was wrecked from 15 years of drug and alcohol use. I had almost no capacity to sit with my own emotions. I didn't even know what certain emotions felt like. I really didn't feel anger that deeply. And so I was just in that functional shutdown, like dorsal vagal shutdown. And so that's another reason I think maybe why that happened so quickly. So topical steroid withdrawal, about 7 months in, I decided to do full carnivore diet. I also was heavily on antihistamines. I even took Xanax for a while to sleep because you're just wet and oozing plasma. So sleeping was incredibly traumatic. And so during this time, I started to have heart palpitations. You're shaking all day. Like I had to convince myself to just go one more minute. Just make it one more minute. Just do this one more thing. And that was a hopelessness and a scariness that I had never experienced before. I never had suicidal thoughts, but it was almost like I would do anything to just stop feeling this much pain 24/7. Like there was such a breaking point at one point. And so carnivore diet actually helped pretty significantly. I had already been on LDI for a while. I found something called NAET, which stands for the doctor who invented it. I cannot say the name correctly. And then AET stands for allergy elimination technique. And so I had started doing that. I found Healy, which is a frequency specific microcurrent device. And I think all of those things combined helped. But the one thing that I finally did, which is the whole point of this podcast, is I actually started to do deep inner work. So even though I became a therapist, even though I was interested in yoga and breath work, and that helped me, and I started doing meditation, I resisted the hell out of doing inner work. I learned about it. I logically understood. I could explain it to people. I knew how the brain worked. I understood how the nervous system worked to some extent. I knew about polyvagal theory, but I had so much resistance to practicing and embodying the things that I logically knew. And I know a lot of people struggle with this too. So I could watch videos on how this works and how to do the healing. But then when it came down to the practice, the morning routine, doing the guided meditation, doing the worksheet, changing your belief systems, I just didn't do it. I wanted to learn about it and consume. And that's part of the whole personality part of being like a type A driven Virgo. I am also a lot German. So these types of women that you can relate to this, you are really good at consuming and learning and regurgitating and teaching, but to actually slow down and start to connect with your body and to understand the signals that your body is teaching you. This is something that most of us that maybe can relate to this have a much harder time doing, because we're really good at shutting down our emotions, our sensations, our feelings, so that we can perform, maybe so we can people please or fawn. If people around me are all happy, then there's no conflict and I don't have to deal with that. I often used to think, I didn't think I was a people pleaser per se. I knew I had codependency issues from the amount of drugs and alcohol that really consumed my life for a long time. But I didn't think I was a people pleaser, because the way I thought about it was, well, I can handle the distress. So I'll just go along with what they're doing because I don't really care. Like, I can handle whatever this person wants to do. I don't really have a strong opinion. And that was part of that whole trauma response and the calcium shell and just numbing, being in dorsal vagal shutdown, that I didn't realize was why I just didn't have strong opinions about things. I didn't have a voice because I didn't know how I truly felt. I was incredibly disconnected from my body. And then of course, my body, when you don't listen, your body starts screaming. When you don't pay attention to what's going on and you just keep shoving things down, your body gets louder and louder. And of course, that's finally what happened to me. So after I finally started doing that inner work, because I couldn't function. I could only sit with my thoughts, and they got so scary. And so they were racing. I was very much stuck in the limbic loop. If you've ever had really bad pain, or if you've had skin issues, you know that you're kind of constantly always thinking about it because you can't not wear clothes. Itching and pain are things that are just like you can't not think about it. And so I was spending every waking hour thinking about my skin. So when I was working was honestly the only thing that took me out. So I just, of course, shoved myself into my work even more. And I was becoming very successful, but I was still not really speaking my truth because I was hiding, because I was just like, how can I possibly be helping people if I am the worst I've ever been? So my self-esteem was pretty bad at that time as well. And of course, I was still able to help people, because you don't need to be 100% perfect to be able to sit there and listen to someone and be there for them. You don't need to be 100% perfect to teach concepts that may change someone's life. And you don't need to be 100% perfect all of the time in order to be valuable to other people. So these were also things that I learned during this time. So working 24/7, worst I've ever been, finally doing the inner work just because I had no choice. I was unable to think about anything except for negative things about myself. And this is when I was like, okay, is this rock bottom? I already quit drinking by this point. So I was like, what else do I have to do? Like, what am I doing wrong? And it's been, at this point, a good year and a half since, maybe more than that. No, about a year and a half since I really started to embody the things that I avoided for so long, which resistance to that kind of work is very common. I speak to a lot of people who also have that resistance. They'll buy a program, they'll do lesson one, and then they don't do it anymore. They don't touch it. Or, they'll see a therapist for a couple of times and maybe feel worse and be like, this person doesn't know what they're doing, which is very common, because when you're part of the brain, the limbic system, and the brain that's trying to keep you safe, any type of change could be viewed as bad, and even a good change. So even doing breath work and trying to come out of that sympathetic fight or flight energy, or doing something that brings you out of dorsal vagal, out of that shutdown. Like for me, I finally started to feel emotions. I've always been very safe in my relationship. My boyfriend is incredibly amazing, and I've always felt comfortable talking with him and telling him about how I was feeling, which was new to me. But when I started to feel like true anger and things were making me mad, I was like, well, I don't like this either. But it was an emotion that I got to finally work through. And I got to process events that were probably making me angry for decades. And I actually got to reconnect with how I should have felt. Not should. I don't want to use the word should, because there's no true way someone should feel, but things that I should have been incredibly upset or angry about. But because I was so shut down, I just let them happen and was like, whatever, this is life. I can handle it. I'm good. And so I actually got to go back and kind of, when I was ready, of course, dig up some of these things that were very traumatic, but I didn't see them as traumatic because I didn't feel the anger at the time. So I got to work through a bunch of old stuff. But as we know now, you can't just focus on the old things that happen and try to process everything, because you'll never, ever get through everything. You'll be doing trauma work all day. So the real bit that really has helped me to get out of those chronic stress patterns and adrenal fatigue, quote unquote, patterns, was living in the moment, which was always something that I struggled with. I was always in my head and thinking about the future, or just planning, got to prepare, got to get to the next thing, never really slowing down. So healing the old can happen in the future if we can be here in the future, or sorry, not in the future, if we can be here in the present. Healing happens now, doesn't happen back then. So being able to embody, like using my senses and slowing down and feeling how I was feeling. I never really liked the scents or smells. And recently what I started doing was I started getting the smell of like one of the fancy hotels here in Miami because I absolutely loved it. And so I bought the smell, put it in my bathroom. And now every time I go in my bathroom, it hits me with like pleasure and that sense of smell that's just like, oh, I love this smell. And I don't remember what I was thinking when I walked in the bathroom. It gets you into the here and now to start to use your senses and slow down. So yes, trauma work, release work is very helpful. But for me, I knew I had to do a lot of focusing on connecting with my body. So now where I'm at is I'm hopefully on one of my last courses for a long time. I still tend to continue to want to learn, but I'm in a German new medicine course, which has allowed me to understand that my body didn't make any mistakes. So the whole time I was sick, it wasn't actually that something was wrong with me, that my body was broken. German new medicine is a discovery that our body makes changes and adaptations depending on the types of stress that we go through and depending on our environment. So it has been just incredibly eye-opening to learn and understand why I went through so many things, what my body was actually doing. And now I have that deep inner knowing that it wasn't just because I made mistakes and I was drinking, using drugs for so long, that was my coping mechanism for what was going on in response to the stressors. So now in this group program, yes, I want to teach you all about how to take care of your hormones. I say adrenal fatigue in quotes because you may have heard that adrenal fatigue does not exist. Because the adrenals are responding appropriately to the messages from the pituitary, which is responding to messages from the hypothalamus, which is responding to messages from our nervous system. And the hypothalamus sits in the limbic part of the brain, and that part of the brain is designed to keep you safe always. So it filters reality through every experience you've ever had. And so if you've had some really difficult experiences, if you've had some trauma, if your capacity to handle stress is so small because you're drinking so often to try and open it, and then when you stop drinking, it gets smaller and smaller, then your part of the brain, your limbic part of the brain, is going to recognize more and more things as dangerous. And so this can manifest as anxiety, histamine issues, and mast cell and allergies, and all sorts of different things, because your body's always trying to keep you safe and warn you. So a reaction or anxiety feelings can be your body's way of warning you that something in your area could be dangerous. And I don't want to say that it is wrong, because it's not wrong. It's doing what it was designed to do. But what happens during a very stressful event that's acute, unexpected, and makes you feel very isolated, your body's going to take a snapshot, or your subconscious is going to take a snapshot of everything that is around you. So if you were eating a turkey sandwich at the time, if it was summer, if you were wearing red shoes, like if your mom had that yellow sweater on, it's just taking a snapshot because this moment was stressful. So the limbic part of the brain is going to remember, hey, when these things were around you at this time of day, at this time of the year, something bad happened. And so the next time we're around these things, we are going to tell you that you should get the F out of there. And so that's what the brain is doing. And it's telling the rest of the body this as well. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Your brain, your organs, your psyche, they all are responding to the stress or events that you're experiencing, the way you perceive it. So one person's perception of a stressor is not going to be the same thing as another person's perception of a stressor. A car accident to me may be absolutely nothing when I was really shut down. Whereas a car accident to someone else may be the most traumatic thing that they've ever gone through. So your perception is going to determine what part of the brain and what organs are impacted. And once it's determined, your body runs these special biological programs, and you go into a sympathetic activation until that situation or conflict is resolved. Once it's resolved, you go into the healing phase. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of people have symptoms. So in order to build our capacity to handle stressors and not have tons and tons of events become biological programs and cause these changes in the body, we need to work on resiliency of our nervous system. We need to disrupt or help our limbic system understand that not everything is dangerous. So some neuroplasticity techniques and limbic system regulation techniques are really helpful. Somatics and being able to understand the sensations of our body, and then also being able to sit with uncomfortable sensations, and maybe even knowing how to shift those uncomfortable sensations and thoughts and emotions and things that are happening in our mind and body. Doing this type of work, either with a professional or on your own, has been the most impactful thing that I have done in my whole life. You've now heard my whole life story. I feel very confident that I can help walk other women through how to take care of yourself and how to get out of these chronic stress patterns so that you, A, don't burn yourself out, B, you can really figure out your voice and be able to express yourself so that you don't have people pleasing and fawning and that dorsal vagal shutdown. So you can actually have opinions about things and feel emotions, and you're able to sit with difficult sensations and symptoms that may happen. I think that the way that we live in our world with just chronic stress and lights and junk blue lighting and EMFs and terrible junk food and all that is one thing. We can physically understand how to take care of ourselves, which is something I will definitely be teaching as well, because that is one piece of the puzzle. But then we have so many other pieces of the puzzle. We have our energetic health, we have our mental health, we have our spiritual health. And those are all really important things that are going to allow you to understand maybe why things happen the way they did, which you may have seen as negative or difficult or hard, but in reality, it was preparing you. Like I look at this now, that dark night of the soul years that I went through was preparing me to give back to the community, to maybe be a good mother, breaking generational patterns and chronic addiction patterns and things like that. And now you're going to be honed with the skills to be able to not just take care of yourself, but radiate an energetic frequency that allows other people to see just how amazing the changes you've made are, and eventually will impact them as well. So my whole goal of the podcast, The Healer Revolution, is to showcase brilliant, amazing people who have used the power of their mind and the resiliency of their nervous system and body to recover from insane things that they should never have been able to recover from, according to Western medicine, and to prove that healed people help heal people. Everyone I've had on this podcast, it has an amazing coaching or practitioner practice where they give back. Some of them have their own programs, group programs. They also have community-based events, And every single one of these people has just been incredible to interview, and just such a light to see that it is possible for you to recover from almost anything. Dare I say anything? So I really hope you enjoyed this episode, getting to know me a little bit more, as well as all the other episodes I've had on so far. I'm just getting started. I have so many more amazing guests coming up for the rest of the year. And as always, please like and maybe leave a comment, maybe as many stars as you think I deserve, so that these messages of hope and how to do the inner work, how to recover, so that more people can heal. So it's not just that fear-based, you got to be super rigid, you got to cut out all these foods, you got to eat this diet, you have to avoid mold forever, you got to parasite cleanse constantly. Like, I want to get out of the fear-based type marketing, and I really want to promote all of the amazing ways you can shift your mindset and also take care of your thoughts, your psyche, your nervous system, your brain, and really change how you feel on a day-to-day basis. So thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been really fun for me. And as always, reach out. I'm at Amanda Panacea on Instagram, or at The Healer Revolution. And my website is thehealerrevolution.com. My new group program should be out a little bit after this podcast is released. So please follow at _Adrenal Revolution on Instagram for updates. Thank you guys. Aww. Thank you so much for listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, leave a comment, anything that can help get this information out to more people who may be struggling. You can also find me online at thehealerrevolution.com or amandapanacea.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at Amanda Panacea. Thank you so much for joining the revolution.